Welcome back to the functions unit. Today we're going to be continuing our functions units by talking about graphing linear equations using a table. Let's go ahead and take a look at that right now. So we have a few steps when it comes to graphing linear equations with a table. So remember that given an equation, we can make a table using x and y values. We're going to graph then the ordered pairs on the coordinate plane. Then we're going to connect the points with a line and put arrows at the end of our lines. So now let's take a look at how that works in example A. So here we are in example A, and it says given the linear equation, create a table and a graph. So we've got our equation here, y equals negative 3x plus 2. We've got a table, but it's empty, and we've got a graph there, but it doesn't have anything on it. So we're going to have to put some points on our graph in order to figure out where our line is going to be. So we've got x's and y's, and the way this is going to work is we are going to select the x's, and then we're going to plug them in or substitute in order to find our y's. Now, since I get to select my x's because there aren't any x's there for me to pick, I can pick numbers that are going to be easy for me to work with. So there are some parameters when it comes to the type of x's that I should pick. So in this case, my graph goes up to 10 and stops at negative 10 on both sides. So I don't want to pick numbers that are higher than that because they won't be on the graph and I won't be able to graph them. I'm always going to select 0 because 0 is an easy number to plug in and substitute and do math with. So I'm going to plug in 0. Then I always want to have a positive number and a negative number. I'm going to select positive 2. You can select other numbers, but I'm going to select 2. It doesn't matter what numbers you pick, as long as you pick numbers that are going to be on the graph. And then I'm going to select a negative number so that I have a point on that side. And in this case, I'm going to select negative 3. So again, it doesn't matter what numbers you picked. You can pick different x's. Just make sure they're on the graph. In this case, all those numbers are going to be on the graph, so I think I'm okay. Now we're going to start with our substitution. So the first number that I have there in my graph or on my table is negative 3. So I'm going to plug that in. So I'm going to have y is equal to negative 3. Use my parentheses when I substitute. So I've substituted my negative 3 and then plus 2. Then all I have to do is follow the order of operations. So negative 3 times negative 3 is going to give me positive 9. Then I'm going to have positive 9 plus 2. So 9 plus 2 is going to give me 11. So y equals 11. So negative 3, y is 11. Now 11 is not on our graph, so we're going to have to see how that works out for us. But for now, it looks like we're going to be okay because we got a couple of other points that we want to get on our graph. The next one we have on our graph is going to be 0. So again, we're going to be substituting in exactly the way we just did before. I have y is equal to negative 3, parentheses, I'm going to be plugging in 0 this time, plus 2. So now I've got negative 3 times 0, following our order of operations. Negative 3 times 0 is 0, plus 2. Then 0 plus 2 is 2, so y equals 2. So when we have x is 0, y is going to equal 2. Then we have one final problem to do here. We've got to plug in our 2, so let's go ahead and do that now. I've got y is equal to negative 3, plug in 2, plus 2. So negative 3 times 2 is going to give me negative 6, plus 2. And then y is equal to negative 6 plus 2, which is going to be negative 4. Again, if you don't know your integer rules, that's okay. Just make sure that you use your calculator. So now that I've got all of my points filled out in my table, I'm going to have to draw those points on my graph. Now, as we talked about before, negative 3, 11 is not on our graph, so we're not going to be able to graph that one right away. It's going to be just off our graph, which isn't the end of the world. So let's start with 0, 2. So I go 0 up 2. That's where one of my points is going to be. Then I'm going to go over 2, down negative 4. Now, if I was going to put our negative 3 on the graph, it would be over to negative 3, up to 11. So it would be a little bit off the graph, but it would be up here. So now notice that I've got all of my points on my graph and they make a line. We're talking about linear equations. So if you're talking about a linear equation, it should make a line every time that you do one. So now that I've got them all there, I'm going to take my line and I'm going to connect all of my points. So I've got my blue line here, and I'm going to connect all my points to make them in a nice line. Notice that my line is going to go all the way through my graph. I want to make it go all the way through my graph on both sides. And then remember, I want to add arrows to my graph on both ends. So I should have one arrow here and one arrow here. You should always have arrows because lines go on forever and ever. Now, just because these are the points that we pick doesn't mean that they're the only points that will work. There are other points on this graph that do work. We just didn't select them for our table. That's why you can always select different x's, and as long as you do that, you should still get the same line. It doesn't matter what x's you pick because the linear equation remains the same. Now let's take a look at example B. Here we are at example B, and it says, given the linear equation, create a table and a graph. So this time we've got a linear equation. It says y equals 3/4 x minus 3. Again, we've got a table with nothing in it, and we've got a graph where we're going to be graphing points. Now in this case, again, I'm going to get to pick my x's. And again, I want to pick numbers that are easy for me to work with. Now, whatever number I plug in this case, I'm going to have to be multiplying by 3/4. So I could pick any number like I did last time. Again, remember staying between 10 and -10. However, since I'm going to be multiplying by fourths, in this case 3/4, I want to make sure that my numbers are multiples of 4. Because otherwise, when I multiply, I'll end up getting decimals or fractions. Not that those are wrong, not that those aren't on the line, they're just very complicated to graph. So the first number that I'm going to pick is 0, because 0 is a very easy number to multiply anything by, so I'm always going to pick 0. And I need to choose a negative number that's going to be a multiple of 4, and in this case I'm going to choose -4. That's a lot easier than any other number I could pick. Of course I could pick 8, -8, but in this case I'm going to pick +8. You could pick 2 negatives, you could pick 2 positives, but in this case I want to have one of each. So now that I've got my numbers that I've chosen, I'm going to plug those in. I'm going to do some multiplication. So let's start with our 3/4 here. So we're going to write out our equation, y equals 3/4 x, but I'm going to be plugging in -4 for our first x minus 3. 3/4 times -4 is -3. So that gives me y equals -3. Bring down the -3 that I have there. Then y equals -3 minus 3. -3 minus 3 is going to give me -6. So our first point there is going to be -6 when we plug in our -4. Now we're going to use 0. So we're going to be plugging our 0 in. So we've got y equals 3/4. And again, in parentheses, we're going to have 0 minus 3. 3/4 times 0 is 0, so 0 minus 3. Then 0 minus 3 is -3, so whenever we plug 0 in, we're going to be getting -3. Now the last number that we need to plug in here is going to be our 8. So again, we've got y equals 3/4, again, parentheses, +8, minus 3. When I do 3/4 times 8, I get 6, so y is equal to 6 minus 3. Then I just have to do y equals 6 minus 3. 6 minus 3 is 3, so I'm going to end up with 3 as my final point. Now that I have all my points on my graph, I'm going ahead and plot them on my graph so that I can draw a line with some arrows on there. So I've got -4, -6, so I'm going to go ahead and do that one. 0, -3, I'm going to do that one, and then over 8 up to 3 for my final one. And as you can see, my points made a line. All of them were on the graph this time. Now that they're all on there, I'm going to go ahead and draw a line. So I'm going to bring my line up here, and notice that it's not exactly on all of the points, so I'm going to have to readjust my lines. Now, while I'm readjusting my line here, it's important to note that you're going to need to have a line that makes a straight edge. So if you don't have a straight edge with you, you're going to have to make sure that you get a ruler in order to make this work. You can't just freehand these lines. You have to make sure that they are straight. We're making straight lines in our linear equations. We're not making lines that are not straight, so make sure that you always have a ruler. Now that my line is straight, I'm going to throw some arrows on the end. Notice that it goes all the way through the graph, as should yours. If you don't have a ruler while you're making this, make sure that you either have a straight edge or you go ahead and grab one of the rulers. Now let's take a look at the next example. So here we are at example C, and it says given the linear equation, create a table and a graph. So this time we've got y equals 2 with inside parentheses x minus 1. So we're in the same situation before, blank table, blank graph. We're going to have to pick some x's, pick some y's. Well, not pick some y's, pick some x's and find some y's. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm always going to start with 0 because 0 is a good number to easily multiply or subtract or add whatever I need to do with. I'm going to need a negative number, so I'm going to go ahead and grab -3. It doesn't matter which negative number you grab, but I'm going to grab -3 in this case. And I need to grab a positive number, so in this case, again, I'm going to grab +5. Again, it doesn't matter which numbers you grab, just want to make sure that they're going to end up on the graph. So I've got -10, +10, so I don't want to go any larger than that. So we're going to go ahead now and substitute. So we're going to start by substituting in our -3. So we've got y equals 2, parentheses, -3 minus 1, close parentheses. That I've got my substitution in there, I want to make sure that I follow the order of operations. So I'm going to be doing what's inside the parentheses first. So -3 minus 1 is going to give me -4. If you're not sure about your integer rules, make sure to use your calculator. So I'm going to end up with 2 times -4. I don't have any symbol in between. I've got two numbers next to each other and one's in parentheses. I know that means multiplication. So 2 times -4 is going to give me -8. So y equals -8. Now I'm going to have to substitute in my 0. So again, I'm going to follow the same process. Y equals 2, open parentheses, plug in my 0, minus 1, close parentheses, 0 minus 1, because again, we're going to be following our order of operations. It's going to be -1. So I've got 2 times -1. 2 times -1 is going to give me -2, because a negative times a positive is a negative. So -2 is my answer there. Finally, I have to substitute in my 5, so let's go ahead and do that. I've got my y equals 2, open parentheses 5, then I'm going to bring over my minus symbol, -1, close parentheses. 5 minus 1 is 4, because again, we're going to be following our order of operations. 2 times 4 is then 8, so we end up with y equals 8. So now that we've got all our points, we want to go ahead and put them on the graph. So let's go ahead and do that now. -3, -8 is going to be down here. And then I've got 0, -2. And finally, I've got over 5 up to 8. So as you can see, I made all of my points on my graph, and they made a straight line. If one of my points isn't on that line, then I know I made a mistake when I was figuring out what that point was. So now I'm going to go ahead and drag my line, make sure that it goes all the way through the graph. My line does. Again, remember to use a straight edge or a ruler, either one. Now I need to make sure that I have arrows on my line because it goes on forever and ever, and I want to make sure that I show that, and that brings us to the end of that one. Now let's go ahead and take a look at example D. Here we are at example D, and it says given the linear equation, create a table and graph. And again, we've got y equals -1/3. So again, I've got fractions that I need to multiply. I want to remember that whenever I have integer coordinates, to use x values that are multiples of 3, or in this case, but in multiples of whatever our denominator is. So in this case, we're going to be using valuables that are multiples of 3 since we have -1/3. So let's go ahead and select some values. Again, I'm always going to pick 0. 0 is an excellent number to always pick, so I always want to have 0 that I'm going to be multiplying by. Then I need to pick another negative that's going to be a multiple of 1/3, so I'm going to select -6, and I need to select a positive number, and I'm going to select +3. Again, are these the only numbers that I could pick? No, but I picked multiples of 3, and I wanted 1 negative, 1 positive, and 0. So now that I have those, I want to go ahead and start substituting. So I'm going to plug in my 0, so I've got -1/3, in parentheses my 0, and -1/3 times 0 is going to be 0, so that's going to be very easy. Y is going to be equal to 0. Then I'm going to plug in my next value, which is going to be -6, so I've got y equals -1/3, open parentheses, -6. I'm going to take that and multiply them together. Negative times a negative is going to give me a positive, and that's going to result in +2. So I'm going to go ahead and put that down as my answer there. Then I'm going to go ahead and plug in my last value down at the bottom. So y equals -1/3 times +3, and when I do that, remember a negative times a positive is going to give me a negative, and 1/3 times 3 is going to give me -1. Now that I've got all of my points, let's go ahead and plot those on my graph. So I've got -6, 2, so over to -6, up 2. I've got 0, 0, that's real easy. That's at the origin, graph that right in the middle. And then over 3, down 1. And notice that my points are making a line, so fabulous. It looks like I've done that portion correct. I'm gonna drag my line over here. You should draw your line either using a straight edge or a ruler. Notice that my line goes all the way through my graph. That's what you want it to do for yours as well. Then we need to put arrows on the end of our line because our line is going on forever and ever. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the final example. Here we are at the final example, and it's a little more complicated. I've got -5 plus 4x, so whatever I take, I'm going to be multiplying by 4 first and then adding -5 to it. So since I know I'm going to be multiplying by 4, I want to pick numbers that are very, very small, because when I multiply them by 4, they're going to get very, very big very quickly, and then they're going to end up off my graph. So the points that I need to choose are going to be numbers that are very small. So in this case, I'm going to pick 0, because I always pick 0. I'm going to need to pick a negative value. In this case, I'm going to pick -1. Because again, I want to stay small, and then I'm going to select +2 because again, I want to stay small, because whatever I'm multiplying by, or whatever I pick, I'm going to have to multiply by 4, and I don't want that number to get out of control and off my graph. So now that I have my 3 points, let's go ahead and start with our substitution. I want you to go ahead and try substituting these all yourself and see how you do. I want you to pause the video now and then come back to see if you were able to do the substitutions correctly. How did you do? Did your points end up being the same points that I got? Hopefully they did. If not, go ahead and take a look at your work and fix the ones that are mistakes. Now that we've got our points, let's go ahead and graph them on our graph. Starting out, we've got -1, -9. Let's go ahead and put that in the right place. 0, -5 is our next point, and over 2 up to 3 is our final point. Now we can see that all of our points are in a line, so let's go ahead and drag our line over, or draw one if you need to, using a straight edge or a ruler. Now that I've got my line all lined up, I'm going to go ahead and throw arrows on the end of it so that I know that my line goes on and on and on, and that problem is done. That brings us to the end of this video, so if you go ahead and like this video, go ahead and throw us a thumbs up. If you love this video, go ahead and throw us a sub, and we will catch you in the next one.